Okay, we're going to get going. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our seventh webinar. This is very informal, so it's not very formal, but we create a learning opportunity. So this started with an idea, just of a few friends starting to chat rugby, and then we started at an idea to expand it, and here we are. We've got our seventh speaker tonight as well. Before I introduce him, I see also one of my mates and former professional player, Mr. Hanno van Vuuren, is online here as well. It's nice to see you here. It's also involving coaching after his professional career. And then, yeah, so some of the locals are back as well. And then we also have Hanno's mum here tonight. So, Tannie Mariana, baie welkom. Lekker om weer nie in persoon te sien nie, maar online te sien. So, yeah, so I'm going to introduce someone tonight that's going to discuss a very important, a very dear friend of mine. It actually started as a student, but we became good mates through his journey, and we had a lot of good times together. He was part of my management team as a conditioning coach, but also a close friend, someone that I've learned a hell of a lot from, and hopefully learned from me. So just background on Hanno. So I think I know a bit more than his mum knows, especially his later years. But I won't go into detail. So he went to school at TUDEF Milan, matriculated there, then started a BSc Sports Science degree. Then did high performance and honors, and then later on did a master's study in sports science, focusing on concussion knowledge, specifically of different role players at club rugby. And he's going to touch on that a bit. So he looked at the knowledge of players, administrators, coaches, the medics that assist the players, and then he also looked at to look in the processes and steps followed with regards to post-concussion return to play. So he's going to touch on today, and he designed it around how can this assist clubs in school and to manage concussion better, because concussion is a reality and it's something that we can shy away from, and we can't just depend on box smart to put systems in place, because they're doing a hell of a big job, but sometimes we don't apply this stuff. So hopefully you'll get key messages from tonight that you can apply in your school. So Hanno, thanks for your time, and hopefully and we'll enjoy it, and you'll definitely add value, and we're looking forward to you presenting.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Wilbur. Yeah, evening, everyone. It's kind of weird just chatting. I'm not used to this type of setup. I'm usually better in person. My keynotes for tonight is Wilbur always just tells me to speak slower, so I'm just going to try and cruise through it tonight. Can everyone see my slides? Wilbur, just give me confirmation if you can see my slides.
Yeah, we can see it, Hanno.
Okay, cool. Okay, so tonight I'm just going to be chatting about kind of my global theme is just the gray area around concussion, post-concussion management. I wanted kind of to go into more details and give it a cuter theme like 50 Shades of Grey, but I thought I'd just shy away from that. So yeah, as Wilbur said, I did my master's on concussion and post-concussion management, and for me it's kind of a big passion. The topic came along, but then during myself and Wilbur's coaching years, we kind of got thrown into the deep end, or I did quite a bit, and I actually saw it firsthand. And now in working in school level as well, just running around, just seeing like how the knowledge isn't translated, and I think just is mismanaged. So my global theme for tonight is just kind of going through and putting something on black and white for you guys. And to everyone listening, just kind of moving away from the gray area, right? So hopefully I can just shed some light on the topic tonight. Okay, so I thought I'd start off with a story on what qualifies as a concussion. So Wilbur actually taught me to always start off with a story or a joke, and I thought I'd just start off. So a couple of years ago, I was playing a bit of res rugby. I think I was 5th or 6th year. I'm a long-time student. So anyway, playing a game, got onto the pitch, and after the game, had to drive home, got into the car, and I remember feeling 1 second feeling a bit tipsy and drunk, and the next moment feeling hungover. And I remember I forgot how exactly to shift gears in the car. So got to the flat. took a shower and fell asleep. My flatmates were trying to keep me awake, but I remember feeling, I don't know, road rage on the way there or back to the flat and all that. So I think that was kind of my personal experience of experiencing a concussion and it being a delayed onset of symptoms. Walking off the pitch fine and then getting into the car and not knowing how to drive. So that for me was quite, or my personal experience with concussion. So as most of you know, concussion, it's a gray area because it's not a visible injury as with a broken arm or a broken femur, whatever the case may be, or even just a blood injury. So I think that's also the difficulty of concussion. So in broad terms, it's a disturbance that affects the brain, and it can be caused due to a direct or indirect contact to the head, and usually due to a rapid acceleration or deceleration with the head or body. So being whiplash or being direct contact with the head. And still to this day, I'm not quite sure what caused the concussion that I experienced on that day. So the problem with concussion is that it manifests in different planes. And I think the thing that we lack is that we're not always sure in which planes it manifests. So cognitively, it can manifest with a headache afterwards or directly afterwards or prolonged with trouble retaining new information or just confusion, me not knowing how to drive. Physically, it can manifest as a balance disturbance, blurred vision, nausea, neck pain. And then I think the last two is something that I don't think most people know, is that it manifests, or it could manifest as a sleep disturbance as well. And then in your mood. So sleep disturbance being sleeping either too little or too much, or just fatigue. So I think something to keep an eye out for if you're in a supportive role of someone that's playing, either whether it be a coach or girlfriend or boyfriend of a player, or just a support system of a player, is just monitoring their sleep and their fatigue after a match. Could quite be an indicator of possible concussion. And then just mood as well, irritability, anxiety, and anger, and the list goes on. But I think cognitively, I think we're lacking. If we look at the 4 planes, cognitively, I think we're lacking with the implementation of, how can I say, testing the cognitive plane. Physically, I think the finger test, it doesn't make sense. Waving a finger in front of someone's face and thinking that'll tell you whether they're concussed or not. And then the last 2, I think, is quite difficult because it's when you leave the pitch. Sleep disturbance and mood is something that the support system can monitor for you if you give them a heads up. So if there is potentially a concussed player or players, asking their support system, their parents, their guardians, their girlfriends, boyfriends, whoever the case may be, to actually just keep an eye out if there's something irregular, like them just diving for the bed where they usually go for a couple of drinks, or mood as well, just picking up on that. So I think that's quite important. So I think that it touches on the education of just asking someone who is in their support system just to keep an eye out for those last 2. So with a suspected concussion, sorry, I lisp and there's a lot of S's in suspected. So with a suspected concussion, I think the most important aspect is to test for as many domains as possible. As I said previously, so moving away from the random finger waving test. And one of my mates has a saying, if it's not on paper, it's vapor. So with us who are usually in a supportive role of the sport person or sport or coach or whatever management team, I think it's always great just to have something on paper to cover yourself and to cover the player. So cognitively, there are the standardized SCAT test and head smart test, which is actually a computerized test, which I'm going to walk through. And then physically, the base test, which is balance error scoring, that you guys can actually try and complete while I'm running through that, which is quite fun. And then, as I said, with sleep and mood, it's difficult to test for because it's so subjective. But then looking at actually just asking the support system, educating them or giving them a heads up on possible symptoms, and then just asking them to report back. And the most important thing here is following up. I think it happens very often that or seldom that we actually just ask them, listen up, just give me a call, or even just you as a coach or management just following up with all your players after a match. And I think that could become standard protocol for us. I know it's 15 WhatsApps, but I think it could mean the difference between identifying and not identifying a possible concussion in players is just sending out WhatsApps, or even how can I say it? Micromanaging it, having the forwards coach send to his 8 forward players and the backline coach sending a message to his backline players, just checking in on how they're feeling after the match of their game. It doesn't have to be, do you have a concussion? It can be, how are you feeling the next morning? And then just following up. So I think structured like that, it could even be something as a Google Forms that we can set up and have a standardized one, and just saying, how are you feeling this morning? Do you have a headache? Do you have, where do you have pain? Putting in a graph, and maybe just asking them, what are they feeling? So the next slide is on the COG state. So this is quite cool. This comes back to the slide on CogState, which is HeadSmart's program, which they're successfully running in Australia. Now, there is someone in South Africa running this program. Legacy Performance has currently adapted the program, and this is a computerized neurocognitive test that they use, which uses playing cards, a deck of cards, in which they have 4 tests. So they test your processing speed, in which a playing card would appear, and they'll see how quickly you could click on the playing card. So testing your processing speed, then having your attention, in which they also have a mini game with a playing card as well, looking at I think it's it's memory retention, or just attention to which card was shown beforehand, and then learning. So actually being able to recall a couple of playing cards. So this is actually my report that I did. So it'll give you, it'll shoot out your basic information on the left-hand side, and then on the left bottom, it'll kind of give you your standards, and then just do this, or it'll post you your your pre-screening results. So the lovely thing with CogState, and this is just an example of something that you can use if you have especially in schools. I think they're successfully rolling it out now at Paul Gym. Is you get all the team or teams into a computer room, they set it up, and they run through the test. It's fully automated, and all the kids have to do is be able to click, and you do this baseline, so before the season starts, and then after a suspected concussion, and even you can do it a third time. I think you pay a once-off fee, I'm not quite too sure, and then after this you can complete this test as many times as possible or as needed until it reveals that your scores are acceptable. So each time it compares it to your baseline scores. I think there's room for this. I think we do now with this distance learning and everything we're going through now with the virus. I think we have the resources in place to be able to maybe just put something like this on the table at schools, at clubs. They can do it in the comfort of their own home. It's an online tool that I believe we can use just to have a better idea. And once again, if it's not on paper, it's vapor. So getting something on paper, such as a baseline screening. The next test I'm just going to address is the SCAT-5, which we're looking at now. This is just a quicker screen grab of this. So it also tests your immediate memory, your concentration. Also, this is a pen and paper test. You can do print a form, and it's a self-explanatory test that someone could administer with a player. Also, just looking at listing certain digits, counting down or listing the months of the year from December backwards, and then timing them and looking at the amount of errors as well. have a look. The SCAT is a free and it's a preferred choice of pen and paper assessment. Also working on a baseline preseason, and then whenever there's a suspected concussion, running through the SCAT and just covering all our bases. So knowing what assessment to do. There's a list of symptoms as well included in the SCAT. So just maybe giving that a run through. It's actually quite a fun activity to play with, to test yourself. So the next plane, I'm looking at the BESS, which is the balance error scoring system. So the first of this is on the left-hand side, the far left-hand side will be your double stance. So standing, eyes closed, hands on your iliac crest, and standing like that for 20 seconds. And usually we have one or two, two will be more reliable testers that just have a look whether the person is able to maintain their balance, and if they have hip flexion, for example, greater than 30 degrees, open their eyes, or they stumble, then it's a one error. So there's also online, there's a balance error scoring sheet in which you're not allowed to make, for example, more than 5 to 10 errors within those 20 seconds, and you have a couple of trials. So the middle one will be the tandem stance, which is quite difficult. I've tried it before starting the talk. I tried it with my left foot at the back. It's quite weaker, and it's quite an interesting test to do. And then also the single leg stand. So all three of these, just standing and for 20 seconds each, and trying to maintain your balance, and then scoring yourself, or preferably having one or two testers who can just score you on your balance. And then once again, if it's not on paper, it's vapor. So recording the scores baseline and then comparing this to a possible suspected concussion. So here we get to the nitty-gritty part with the field side management. So my question to you, or to everyone out there, would be, who at your club or at your school is tasked with identifying possible concussions? Within the study we did, we found conflicting results. The players believed it were the coaches. The medical staff also believed it were the coaches, but the coaches coaching the game or coaching the players or coaching from the sideline. So it's quite a difficult question to ask yourself, but is there a set person, one set person or two set people who are tasked pre-season and throughout the whole season with identifying possible concussions? And I think that's quite a difficult question to ask yourself, and maybe just identifying those people, having a manager or a physio or someone adding that to their list of responsibilities field side. So story time. My careers has, how can I say, dabbled a bit. So I'm a jack of all trades, but master of none. And I've quite recently moved into video analysis. So we work with a couple of schools, and I have two stories actually. So with one of our first clients, we were tasked with videoing and recording and statting one of their under 14 trials. So get to the venue, set up, and we start watching trials. The boys are under 14, and the first thing I picked up, and this is now whilst doing my master's on the topic of concussion, is that the first aider is a 15-year-old boy with a bag of ice. That's the highest ranking first aider or medical personnel that is currently next to the field. No ambulance, no. I think the clearer or the closest stretcher was probably 5 km away. So the boy rocks up, goes into a ruck and gets up extremely gingerly. Next phase of play, same boy, eighth man, gets his head on the wrong side of a tackle and is out for 2 seconds. And next to the field was a referee, I don't know what to call him, a referee coach. And my first instinct was to shout and say, get the boy off. He's clearly dazed and confused. And the referee coach or referee educator looks up at me and says, he's not concussed. Now, this is someone who I believe should be promoting and teaching the ref on the field about the safe practices of how to be a referee and managing players, which was quite scary for me. So it just opened my eyes into how someone who's a spectator and assessing the referee believes he knows whether a player should stay on the field or not. Then the second story was with the same team they were playing, or the same school. They were playing at a rugby day, and this was an under 16, as far as I can recall, under 16 game. And they had a Cheslin Colby-like wing. And the next thing I know is this wing that impressed us at trials as well gets up and makes a tackle, gets up slowly. Then I think the next phase goes on, and the play comes back, and they cut back to the blind side. And he gets his head on the wrong side, gets up gingerly as well, hides behind the ruck, and the unthinkable happens. He's forced to make a third tackle, and his head also once again on the wrong side. So it was just before halftime, and I walk up to the coach, and I could see this boy is definitely concussed. I walk up to the coach and ask him, well, I saw this happening. I'm filming from above, whether he'd be okay with it, just to have the kid checked out by the medics before letting him continue the second half. Coach looks at me, shrugs his shoulders, and lets the boy finish the match. Entire second half played, and eventually, through I know it's not my job, followed up, and the kid said he went straight to sleep, had the worst headache he's ever had in his life, and just listed all the symptoms of concussion when asked. So I think it's tough out there, but having someone who is there to identify the possible symptoms of concussion, and it could be anyone. It could be a spectator just making the coach aware of a possible or suspected concussion. And the policy when it comes to suspected concussion is, when in doubt, just sit them out. I can't stress that enough. Even though it's suspected, just have the boy sit out for a while, or not for a while, for that day. There's no scenario in which a suspected concussion can ever return back to the field on the same day. And then, I think it's also important to know who your first aiders are, what level of qualification they have. Is a team manager also tasked with checking if a boy goes back onto the field if it's a suspected concussion? Does he know what the protocol is? Then I think the next question I should ask is, who's allowed to remove the player from the field? So medical staff are allowed to remove the player from the field, coaches and referees, according to law, the law of the game. My next question would be, does a referee actually have a blue card present? Now, for those of you who don't know, and I think most of you should know it, that the blue card, or do know that the blue card is now for a suspected concussion. If a player has a suspected concussion, a player can be sent off with a blue card, and a head injury assessment can be done. However, I think still within professional rugby, I think the biggest mistake they do make is they call it a ding-dong test, or they just call it a knock to a head. There's no such thing. Using colloquial terms shouldn't be allowed. It's either a concussion or it's not. But even with a suspected concussion, and with the before mentioned stuff that I mentioned, with a delayed onset of concussion, a player should not be able, even having completed a ding-dong test or whatever they want to call it, he shouldn't be able to return to the field on that day. There's no circumstance under which a player should return to play if he's gone for assessment. So once again, when in doubt, just sit them out. Then also, I'm playing a bit of a myth buster here, so also just removing the grey out of this. Only 10% of concussions result in loss of consciousness. The LOC stands for loss of consciousness. So if you think that's an indicator, it's clearly not. And it's also not an indicator of severity. So just had to bust that one. Then my third question would be, do role players responsible know the protocol? So who is responsible for the return to play? So now we've covered the identification, the removal. So what's the protocol? Do they go and get tested? Are there tests currently at your club or at your team? Do you know what the tests are? Do you know what the standards are? Do they have a baseline score to compare it to? Are they just doing the finger waving tests? And then lastly, I just like to finish with who's responsible with the follow-up. So basically, who's going to check in on that suspected concussion? You can have it's a touchy subject. Recently, a mom contacted me about her son that died of a contact to his head, and there hasn't been any form of follow-up. And it's a touchy subject, but I believe there should be, not even in the case of death, but there should be some form of follow-up with any serious injury. So who is the person, the medical staff? Is it the medical staff? Is it the coach himself? Is it the, who is responsible for follow-up with not only concussion, but any form of injury? Is a player getting rehabilitation? So that for me is something that I'm quite passionate about, is just following up and asking the kids if they are okay. So now on to the next one, would be concussion confirmed. So while doing a bit of research, we found out about a shocking story at a private school in which I think a 13-year-old boy was actually diagnosed with concussion, and the next match would have been their derby, their inter-schools derby. And he actually turned around, he got diagnosed by the first doctor, turned around, went to the next doctor, and got a second doctor's note to overturn his first doctor's note, or just a second opinion. Went to the assistant coach, who didn't, I don't think, knew about the first or know about the first concussion, and he was actually allowed to play, even though he had a stand down time of I believe 2 weeks. So also just, it is necessary to see a doctor, and I think with concussions of any case and severity, it's a concussion remains a concussion. So see the doctor and take the stand down time. If it was serious enough for you to see the doctor, then definitely there was something the matter with you. So, or a matter with the player. So now, with that being said, I think rest, we have to also discuss the how can we call it, the idea of rest, or the perception of rest. Now, rest for someone with a possible or confirmed concussion means limited cognitive and physical activity. So this could be 7 to 10 days, depending on their symptoms. If their symptoms persevere, that could be longer, and double that for children. So it could be a week of absolutely no activity for an adult male, and then double that 14 days, up to 14 days for children. It could be even longer. So the only gray areas there is let the symptoms guide you. If there are still persisting symptoms, then we can just extend that. So that means limited exposure to screens, hydrate and eat well, limited head and neck movement, no alcohol or driving within 24 hours. If their symptoms are anything like mine, it'll be like driving drunk from your own match. And then I think a big question is whether we should allow children to sleep or players to sleep if they have a concussion. Usually there's this misinformation that they're not allowed to sleep. I think if they are fatigued, or they have irregular sleep patterns, or they are being monitored, the preferred thing would be to do is first see a doctor, then sleep. I think the support system should know the player well enough to know whether is he just tired or is there something the matter with him. So I think then seeing the doctor, and then just then he can sleep, so that you can actually do the tests, the prescribed tests, and get the correct advice from a licensed healthcare professional. Then returning to work or school, and just returning to play. I'm going to walk you through the whole World Rugby return to play protocol now, and then my advised, how can we call it, version. And then also something I think that is taken too lightly is also just returning to work. So it should be a gradual return, whether it be returning to school or returning to work. It should start off with a couple of days, or let's say a couple of hours of screen time, then maybe filling in half day, monitoring your own symptoms or having someone monitor your symptoms. And then only when you've successfully been able to deal with that cognitive load of working half day or a shorter day, then only can you go through your graduated return to play and then return completely. So I'm going to move on to the return to play. So with this return to play, this is World Rugby's, as I call it, the grayscale version of how to return to play. So the first step of returning to play would be now physical rest. So this would be until they are asymptomatic. This usually they say adults will be 7 to 10 days of rest, whereas the children will be up to 14 days of rest. And then if they're asymptomatic after that, then they can progress to continuing their daily living activities, which for me also quite vague. If I'm physically resting, I should obviously be able to do my daily living activities. I don't expect anyone just to lie in bed for up to 14 days. So making yourself a cup of coffee is probably daily living activity. That's where it gets vague for me. So then after completing step 2A, they'll move on to step 2B. So this will be now you've been asymptomatic for a week minimum, and then 2 weeks for children. You've continued your daily living activities and you're asymptomatic. And then next up will be light aerobic activity. Now, this will be, as World Rugby defines it, light jogging for 10 to 15 minutes. I think also quite grey and vague. Light jogging can differ for different people. Then next up will be sport-specific drills, non-contact training drills at step 4. Step 5 will be jumping back into full contact practice, and then 6, return to game. So usually the rest will be a week, a minimum of a week, and then this stepwise return to play protocol will also take you at least a week. So the minimum time will be 2 weeks. If you've completed every step, the minimum time you should be resting, according to World Rugby, should be 2 weeks, and then monitoring yourself or having someone monitor you throughout the process. So if you are symptomatic, for example, you are asymptomatic during your rest period for a week, and your daily living activities continue, and during your light aerobic activity, you have symptoms like a headache or nausea or whatever, then they want you to revert back to step 1. So rest again for 24 hours to 48 hours, and then only continue your daily living activities, have another go at your light aerobic activity. So you revert back. If ever there are any symptoms throughout this, according to World Rugby, you should always revert back to step 1, which is rest, until asymptomatic. So I've now kind of revised this in my way and just try to put more detail and put this on black and white. So I know there's a lot going on in this. So we've chatted about the first step, which is rest for at least, let's say, 7 to 10 days for adults, and then 14 days, up to 14 days for younger boys. My next step would be, or not even my next step, within this rest period, is getting screened by a doctor. So if you see there is something the matter, in my case, having fatigue, just wanting to get in bed, is getting to a doctor and having yourself checked out before you get into bed within 24 to 48 hours. I'm not saying keep that guy awake until you see a doctor. I think it's, I just think a doctor should be part of the process if a concussion has been confirmed, definitely. And then also, keeping a player off of the field is quite hard. So potentially doing a cognitive test on him, as with HeadSmart or CogState, or with a SCAT, having him tested for him to see his scores are deviating off of his baseline scores within 24 to 48 hours. The test is acceptable, that type of cognitive load. So testing him, that type of cognitive load is for me acceptable. And according to the standards of Cogstate and HeadSmart, he is allowed to do the test within 24 to 48 hours. And if that cognitive load is too much, he definitely has concussion. So I think that points it out quite well. So then step 2, continuing your daily living activities. And then just putting a bit of detail into your light aerobic activity. So we can stick to the 10 to 15 minutes of, let's say, light jogging, but maybe incorporate, if he aces the light jogging for 10 to 15 minutes, perhaps maybe try and test it with a balance assessment as well, incorporating the balance assessment into that, the base balance assessment, or even testing his orientation. So I usually do a drill in which I have the boy or the player jog the right around the field. So with the length of the field, I'll have him just jog normally, but with the width of the field, I'll have him jog backwards. Believe it or not, that kind of orientation stress of having to jog backwards for me has at times shown symptoms. So if he then shows symptoms, he's back to step 1. And I think that's it's quite a difficult thing to do with regards to having to push a player, but it can still stick within those 10 to 15 minutes, but also just testing the orientation as with the backward jogging, just to make sure that you see symptoms or that there are symptoms, and that could prove to you that he's not quite ready. So not drilling him harder, just drilling him smarter, if that makes sense. Then with step 3, with a sport specific, World Rugby refers to this as just sport specific skills. So I believe they should be going through a complete warm up, stretching, an increase in heart rate, and then basic skills. And I once again believe, in contrast to World Rugby's, there should be a time limit. So if the warm up is, for example, 5 minutes or 10 minutes, then he should be, for example, doing basic skills up until a certain time. So up until they do contact training, he should be pulled. So I think basic skills, or just putting a more of something rigid in there, like a time limit. Then step 4 will be non-contact training. So I think this we can quantify as kind of a high intensity and volume. So once again, putting a time limit in there, let's say 35 minutes of exercise, still non-contact training, but just lifting the intensity and volume. And even if this means taking that player and doing additional drills with him to make up that 35 minutes. If it's a Thursday and he's at training, having the assistant coach or whoever you have at hand take him through additional drills on his own, maybe just so that he can monitor him. But I think up until step 6, which is full contact match, the player he could do a warm up in a group, but I think there should be someone watching him specifically just to see if he's cringing or he's holding his head, or just checking up on him after every, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes, just asking him, do you have any symptoms? And then having a symptom checklist at hand. Then next up will be step 5. So they call it, I think they refer to it as full contact practice. I would just call it basic contact readiness. So maybe just doing contact in which the body rapidly accelerates and decelerates, doing that in a controlled environment rather than just old school corpus stomp. So having a tackle bag, having a shield, doing rucking in a controlled setup, looking at the body language when he's making contact. Hell, we can even try and video it. Looking at his expression, and then just we can make this full training session intensity and volume. But I think just still keeping the player apart from the group, we can throw another player in there that's also doing rehab, just to lift the intensity even. and then also adding a couple of drills in which we keep this player separate with a suspected or with a concussion, just keeping him separate from the group. Then step 5 will once again be similar to step 1A, in which we just screen by the doc, and this could also be once again incorporating that baseline test we did, or the same test as our baseline, using the Head Smart or the SCAT, and just seeing how it compares. I think we can never be too certain with this type of testing. I think having it on paper is just saving ourselves and covering ourselves, as well as most importantly, just protecting the player. And then I think the step 6, in which he now returns to full match, monitor him during the warm-up, and monitor his sleep the previous night as well, or have his support system just monitor his sleep. And once again, most importantly, if anything, if any symptoms reappear, or his tests are, let's say, weaker than his baseline scores, and he fails a test, he has to revert back to step 1, which is rest until he's asymptomatic, and then we take it from there. Then we can build it up again. Then just in closing, what my main study, my study found is that the responsibility is shifting to all of us. The buck is being passed completely. The players can learn the symptoms. It shouldn't be a last priority for them. They should be able to learn the symptoms of a concussion or speak up. They have the responsibility to speak up when they're not feeling well. The parents and the supporters, they're watching the matches. Usually there are guys, when you hear that from the sideline, you hear oof, or whatever the crowd is doing, then there should be someone who's looking at how gingerly the player is getting up from the ground. So asking a couple of parents to even just identify their own kids or their own players' well-being afterwards. Then managers, I think managers as well should, if there has been a suspected concussion, they have a responsibility as well to prevent players' names from being placed on the team sheet for at least 2 weeks. We know whether it be kids will be 3 weeks, but adults will be 2 weeks. So his name will not or should not be placed on any team sheet, regardless whether he brings a doctor's certificate and he's been cleared. It's still been a suspected concussion. So managers, I think, can take responsibility on with regards to that. And then next up, just referees, having them use blue cards more than yellow cards. I'm not trying to neglect coaches. I think coaches also have responsibilities, but coaches also have the technical and tactical aspects to have a look at. I think referees have a major responsibility to ensure the safety of play. And then also ensure all the stakeholders have the necessary education. Ask your first aiders what level of first aid they have, if there is a match day doctor, whether they have the necessary equipment, what is their protocol, what is their test, what is your first aiders test or your medical staff's test when a concussion occurs or a possible concussion occurs. And then have some sort of baseline testing in place. I can't stress this enough. I think it's just so we can prove to the players as well, and not have to fight the fight with them, but just show them you do have weaker scores compared to this test. And according to that, we are going to have to pull you. Just having something other than our subjective opinion. And then lastly, just knowing who to send players to. I think this was for me, quite shocking with my study as well, is coaches, nor referees, I know it's not referees' responsibilities, but coaches and none of the stakeholders really knew who to send the players to, whether it was an internal or an external party, and who they should go to for follow-up information. And I think just having that in place, there are on Head Smart's website, there are doctors who specialize in concussion, and there are really people out there who are willing to help. So I think just knowing who they are. So yeah, that's me. Thank you guys for indulging me, and yeah, just thanks for your time.
Okay, Hanno, thanks for that. Very insightful, and it's also great to see the practical application that you brought in. I'm actually glad that I have your mom here online as well, because I just want to confirm that that wasn't really a concussion. It was a typical Wednesday night in Stellenbosch. We didn't attend class the next day. So yeah, just the story is out now. So I'm going to go through a couple of questions, I know, and I'm going to combine certain questions. So Philip asked, or let's start with John's question, because that's gonna link to that. So, do you think that side field staff have enough, and he specifically refers to school and club rugby, do have enough knowledge to assess a player and to assist a player? And then he's got a second part of the question, but I'll answer that, and I'll link this scat to that. He asked, is a World Rugby Level 2 coach allowed to do a HIA? So only medical doctors is allowed to do a HIA, and HIA will only take place in professional rugby. So that's the ding. You refer to a ding dong test, and that to that, I don't know if I'm correctly saying, medical doctors are not allowed to administer a scat as well, or is that
Yes.
anyone? Okay.
No.
So just be mindful for that. Yeah.
Yes.
So the first question is, do you think on some side on the film, people on the side have enough knowledge to assess and then to assess the concussion and to assist the player?
To be honest, I don't think they have enough knowledge. I think it's one of those topics that's continually evolving, and to come back, it's a gray area because it's not a visible injury. So I don't think you can ever have enough knowledge of concussion. So to answer your question, no, I don't think we have enough knowledge of concussion. I think we need as many hands as possible. Veel hande maak ligte werk. So having as many hands, or having that player go through as many hands as possible, that's the only way of knowing. And having set protocols in place with tests, I think that's the only way to know for sure. So having a player do a test with the goal of getting him back onto the pitch, that shouldn't be your concern. Your concern should be doing a test to get the player off of the pitch, or rather just get him off of the pitch to be able to do a test. So we should get the players off of the pitch for their own safety. If we're not sure, when in doubt, sit them out. That'll be my answer.
Thanks for that, Hanno. So that links into Philip's question as well, but I want to pose his question a bit differently. He speaks about education, and that links to John's question as well. Do you think we always blame that people don't have enough knowledge, but how do they gain their knowledge? So I want to go to our level 1 and level 2's like education. Do you think that is sufficient to assist a player with concussion? And if you say no, how would you change it?
Are we referring to World Rugby level 1 and 2?
No, first aiders, specifically first aid level 1 and 2.
I think I don't believe it's sufficient. We learn how to resus, and with level 1 we learn how to resus someone, which I believe is crucial. But I think the rest is all theory. So I would improve it via putting in a practical aspect. And concussion for me at schoolboy level and at club level, it happens so often. The rates are enormous. So the rates per match are really skyrocketing because we are becoming more aware of concussion. So I would have a practical component, and adding a practical component to, as with the resus, adding a practical component, not to how to bandage a wound, but actually teaching them the signs and the symptoms, and then also how to get a player off the pitch, whether that be telling the player you were out for a couple of seconds. And I'm not preaching dishonesty here, but I think honestly we need to get a way of getting players off of the field rather than trying to get them back on the field. So I think a practical way would be to teaching first aiders how to manage a return to play protocol, and then just when they do come back, so possibly giving first aiders more work on that week following their rest. But I think the first aiders can take responsibility for that. They're the ones who can identify the concussion. Why can't they be the ones who handle the return to play as well?
Okay, so and I want to add on to that. Let's say there's a lot of instances where club uses, let's say, a company as a service provider to provide them with first aid services. do you think it still needs to be that company's responsibility? Because they're not hands-on, they're not part of that whole process. They're not there in the week. They just rock up on game day, and then they need to provide a service.
I think that's tough. I think it should be a shared responsibility, 100%. So if you have, and that's what I was trying to preach, is a policy in place. So let's say we know that, let's say the external company is only responsible for the identification of concussion, then who is your internal concussion go-to person? Do you have someone on standby? Is there a match day doctor that you can contact afterwards? Who is your on-site, let's say, on-site medic, and who's your off-site medic? Who can you turn to with follow-up advice? So I would say if you are using an external company, perhaps reaching out and getting an internal company as well who handles the follow-up.
Okay, so a lot of our clubs, and especially during this time, is going to suffer financially. So and a lot of these players, and also at schools, their parents can't afford to send a boy or a girl to the doctor. What advice would you give, and how will you, especially with regards to your return to play, you said that's one of your steps. So how will you manage something like that? Because that's a real life scenario. That's the reality that we live in. They can't afford to go to a doctor. They only have a local clinic. How do you assist us with that?
That's a tough one. In an ideal world, I think that my policy as well would be, in an ideal world, I think reach out. And I know the assessment's only allowed to be done by medical doctors, and they're only allowed to be cleared. But I think there are enough experts, as I said, in the field that can potentially help us, that would understand the situation. And I think there should potentially be a, let's call it a BoxSmart hotline, or BoxSmart can maybe take this one, where they say, if you don't have funding to see a doctor, we have a doctor that comes to the club or to the school that assesses you in your own environment, and that can be on them. If there aren't funds, that for example, something can be arranged in that. So I think the government or BoxSmart, who takes responsibility for catastrophic injuries, can perhaps help on that. So I think that's much bigger than we are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I want to add on, you touched on BoxSmart now, because everyone, so BoxSmart, they're there to manage catastrophic injuries, and concussion has been included as part of that. And a lot of money has been invested. But the concern is that it's not applied. How do we change that mindset? Coaches and clubs are not using the knowledge. They're not applying. And I know from your study, some of the coaches that attended the BoxSmart couldn't even sequence the return to play protocol in the correct order. So how do we change that mindset?
I think it shouldn't be something that's neglected. Why are we only looking at safe scrumming and for example, the technical and tactical, let's call it the safe scrumming techniques. Why are we looking at that first in the BoxSmart video, and only later we're told to, for example, walk through the theoretical part and handed a DVD? Shouldn't we be handed, for example, in the class, shouldn't the first activity in the BoxSmart seminar be how to handle a concussion? Shouldn't that shift be made as our main priority, and then only afterwards we can look at this safe scrum techniques? And shouldn't BoxSmart be more practical? That's my plea. Because we are coaches. We're not theoretical coaches. We're practical coaches. We work with human beings. So shouldn't BoxSmart shift their paradigm to working practically rather than theoretically?
Yeah, I agree with you. There should be a more practical component to it. But I think also there's a concern that a lot of the people that attend, they're not there to really attend. They're just there to obtain the certification, so they don't apply stuff. Because I've seen a lot of players, especially when you get to your play of games and your finals, that risk players to play, because the winning becoming important. And I personally believe that winning at all costs has become too important, and player and coaches are not looking, and clubs and schools are not looking after players' well-being. It's all for themselves. There, I even read an article today that some of the matric boys that can't play rugby, they need to do a post-matric. And that's the reality that we live in, that rugby has to come and winning has become too important, and we need to change that mindset, and we need to look after the well-being of the player, and then we're going to get the change. Yeah, box mod is only a start, but I think box mod on its own is not going to be effective. We need to apply that. So then I know there's a couple of there's a high risk. Okay, sorry, just want to mute someone there. Okay, so there's a high risk of concussion, especially in the tackle. Do you think it's due? And John asked, is it due to bad tackle technique, or is it due to bad coaching? What do you think is the reason for that? Hanno, you're on mute.
So I think, thanks, John, for the question. So I think just it's part of the nature of the game. And I know that's not the answer you want to hear, but I think we can practice more proper tackling technique. And I think that it takes a great coach to practice that. But I think it's also tackle with the intent of bringing the player to ground, not, for example, I know it's positive tackling and making positive hits and making big hits, but it should be player safety. Make sure it's safe for you and for the ball carrier. So I think it's a bit of both. I think it takes a great coach to preach and to coach proper tackling technique. So I think it's a bit of both. Yeah, if that answers your question, it's quite a tricky one.
No, I just want to add on to that, and I think it comes down to fitness and conditioning as well. So it's not just the tackling technique itself, because there's been a lot of research that done that the effectiveness of your techniques is not that effective in the last 20 minutes of a game. So that could be due to fatigue. So that's also something, and maybe what type of activities you do, place the player under fatigue the player, and then let him execute the technique or the skill, and then you take it from there. So it's a bit of both, as Anna said, coaching and then player execution. But again, we don't focus a lot on skills, and that's just the effect of that. Then John had a follow-up question on is there a type of online program that clubs can use to follow up on post-concussion return to play? Like, is there like a database type of thing where you can type in a name and follow up from there? I know there's a blue card system where referees need to log the blue card. I don't know.
As far as I'm not sure that there is a online program where you can follow up. My best bet would be to create your own platform via, for example, Google Forms, and make it your own. Personalize it for your club, and see whether you can't create something like that. But I think definitely there's something that I believe Boxmod has some material that you can browse through. But I think taking that and making it your own, nothing's preventing you from having a questionnaire, as I said, that can be all-encompassing after a game, and having to send that to all 15 of your players, or having it as a non-negotiable part after match day on the Sunday. Instead of them wanting to review the film or whatever the case may be, they have to fill in their post-game questionnaire on the injuries, or just following up on that. So if a player says he's had a headache or whatever the case may be, then you send him your custom designed follow-up questionnaire.
Okay, Anna, I'm going to leave you with one question, and you redesigned your own concussion return to play protocol. Will that be can you make that available somewhere for the coaches? And then again, is there an email or a social media link or platform that people can contact you on for more advice?
Yeah, definitely. I'll send you my slides, and I think my stuff's on there. My social media, I'm active on Twitter. I see you raging on people regarding the post-matric. I loved it that morning. But yeah, so anyone can contact me. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook as well. I'm a friendly guy. I try to be. So yeah, I'm on all forms of social media, and then they can also just drop me a mail as well. So I'll just have you send the slides through, and they can contact me via that.
Okay, Hanno, before I thank you, so guys, so next week we have similar time, same time we have Andre to do on how to build a defense, and then the week after that, I think something that a lot of you are looking forward to, it will be a Q&A with Peter de Villiers. Very funny, and then as a great guy with a great sense of humor, but a lot of knowledge. So he'll come in and I'll pose a few questions to him, but you guys are welcome to send your questions via email, and then we can pose them. So Anu, thanks for coming out. Thanks for your time and the work that you're doing. And I think it's important that the message go out. And in summary, I want to say we can't just put the responsibility on a program. There's a human aspect to these programs as well that people need to apply. And I had regular chats with some of these rules are put in place because we don't abide by the rules. I mean, similar to what's happening with the corona now. So there's guidelines in place for lockdown, but people don't listen. So and that's the mindset that we need to change. And I'm glad that you're touching on it. And this work needs to be transferred. I know Leighton that is here as well. He put some of your work in a newspaper. That is great. And we need to transfer this knowledge into bits and pieces where people can understand it. So keep up the good work and good luck with everything on your road and journey, and yeah, stay safe. And thanks everyone for coming out. And I hope you've learned a lot and a lot of practical stuff that you can apply. This is the longest that Hanno has spoke on a 30-minute talk. He took 40 minutes tonight, so definitely improve on that. And then yeah, stay safe and we see each other next week, 16:30, and then we take it from there. Have a blessed week. Keep well. Bye.
Cheers, everyone.